Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar that is being organized by the Global WASH Cluster's Technical Working Group on Fecal Sludge Management and Pro-WASH. A special welcome to those French, Spanish, and Arabic speakers who are tuning in today. We'd like everyone to be aware that we are offering interpretation. You must select the language at the bottom of your Zoom screen: English, Arabic, French, or Spanish. You can ask your questions in the chat box, or apologies, please use the Q&A function to ask your questions throughout today's webinar. In addition to the live interpretation, we also have translated the PowerPoint presentations into Arabic, French, and Spanish. Right now, you can see in the chat box the presentations in the 3 different languages. You are welcome to click on the link and download the presentation if you'd like to follow along in the language that you are most comfortable with. So my name is Nicole Weber. I'm the director of Pro-WASH. Pro-WASH is a USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance funded global capacity strengthening, learning, and operational research award. And we support partners working in humanitarian and development food security programming. We are really excited to partner today with the Global WASH Cluster Technical Working Group on Fecal Sludge Management and to bring to you this information around the sanitation standards for quality in emergencies. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, please send a message to Suzanne in the chat box. I'll turn it over now to Marai to introduce herself and the rest of the team.
Great, thank you, Nicole. And great if I can have the next slide, please. I'd like to repeat the warm welcome to everyone joining us today. Very exciting to see so many people interested in this session to present the sanitation quality standards as were developed by the Fecal Sludge Management Technical Working Group, to talk about when and where they can be applied and to ask for your help in road testing. My name is Marij Zwart. I am a WASH advisor with the Netherlands Red Cross, but I'm also the coordinator of the Fecal Sludge Management Technical Working Group of the Global WASH Cluster, and I'm one of the hosts today, together with David and Tineke, who are leading the work package on standards of the working group. So please, David, could you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm David Thomas. I am a sanitation engineer with the British Red Cross, and I'm also technical director of wastewater for a consultancy called Mott MacDonald. And you're very welcome to join us today.
And Tineke?
Thank you, Marij. Hi, very much welcome, everybody. I'm Tineke Hoijmans, and I'm Associate Professor of Sanitary Engineering at IHE Delft. And as member of the Fecal Sludge Management Group of the Technical Working Group of the Global WASH Cluster, I was involved in the development of the sanitation quality standards for emergencies, which was done in a participatory decision process in 2021. So I'm extremely pleased with the large audience present, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session afterwards, which I will moderate. I will answer some of the easier, shorter questions right in the Q&A, and the rest will be answered after the presentation. So please put your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. Okay, I'm giving now the floor back to Marij.
Great, thank you. So we have 1 hour and we would like to spend a big part of that for Q&A. But first we will start with a quick word on the technical working group, the aim of the standards, the terminology used, because even though fecal sludge management and the sanitation service chain received a huge increase of attention, there is still quite some confusion in the sector on which words to use for what. Then we'll talk about the motivation behind developing these standards. And then I'll hand over to David for a deep dive in the standards and to explain our envisioned road testing. Before we go to our Q&A, next slide, please. So what is the aim of the sanitation quality standards? The aim is to help the humanitarian sector meet the growing challenges of providing the effective fecal sludge management in emergency context, and to guide on when fecal sludge management is required and when not. Actually, I realize now that I skipped the first part, which is introduction of the fecal sludge management technical working group, which is okay, I can talk about it now, because actually the aim of the standards is the same as the aim of the technical working group of the Global WASH Cluster, which was created to increase the quality of sanitation services in emergencies. So the technical working group is a group of more than 20 organizations, humanitarian and knowledge institutes, voluntarily working together to increase the quality of sanitation emergency services. And these standards are one of our outputs, with the aim to help the sector meet growing challenges of providing effective fecal sludge management. And next slide, please. So the technical working group of the Global WASH Cluster, our aim was not to develop many different standards in parallel. In fact, our hope is to work with the standards that we produced to improve quality, with the final dream of including them in the SPHERE standards. That's also why we start from what's already included in SPHERE, which is the standard 1, and then we extend with additional standards. David will go into detail later on what exactly has been added to what's already in SPHERE. Next slide, please. So the quick word on terminology. I will put in the chat also a link to the terminology fact sheet that was produced. It's here, 1 second. That was produced to guide or to come together with the standards, to make sure that we all use the same words for the same things. And next slide, please. So to start with sanitation, with our standards and also with our 2-page fact sheet, we meaning the fecal sludge management technical working group of the Global WASH Cluster, we use sanitation to refer to the provision of facilities and services for the safe disposal of human urine and feces. And it's important to note that it's not only facilities, which should be a latrine or a treatment plant, but also the services required to make those facilities and maintain those facilities usable. Sanitation can also refer to solid waste management, drainage, and vector control, but we are not focusing on that right now. Next slide, please. Sanitation service chain, the way we use it, is the system that manages human feces and urine in the shape of wastewater or fecal sludge, and I will talk later about what the difference is, from the time it's generated until it's disposed of safely without harming public health and the environment. So both public health and the environment protection are the objectives, and they come in many different shapes. Safe sanitation chains. Next slide, please. So, difference between wastewater and fecal sludge. We can talk a lot about that, but we took a very simplistic approach where wastewater is basically the feces and urine produced at a toilet, which is connected to a sewer where flushing water is used to transport the feces and urine to a treatment plant. So wastewater is generally quite dilute, whereas fecal sludge is the material that's collected in on-site facilities like a pit latrine or a septic tank. So it consists of feces, urine, cleansing water, and everything else that's thrown in. So very often fecal sludge will have more solid, will have a higher total solid fraction. It will be more solid, and it also often contains solid waste. And next slide, please. So those safe sanitation surface chains, as said, they come in many different ways. And for systems with a sewage, where wastewater is generated through flushing water, addition of water, flushing water, a safe sanitation surface chain consists of a system with a toilet, with a sewage, with no leakages, leading the wastewater to a treatment plant where it's treated up to proper standards. Whereas for fecal sludge, the safe sanitation surface chain, what it looks like, what it needs to look like to be safe, still depends on local conditions. Next slide, please. So, for example, in an emergency context in rural Uganda, when a family has a pit latrine and the bottom of the pit latrine is still 1.5 meters away from the groundwater level, and when the distance to a water well is more than 30 meters away, and when there is sufficient space for people to close their pit once it's full, and they also have the knowledge and the means to do that in a safe way and maybe even plant a tree on top, and when there is people have space and means to have household latrines, in those cases, just on-site sanitation can be a safe sanitation system without the need to empty and transport and treat fecal sludge off-site. Next slide, please. However, in a lot of emergency conditions where we work in, for example, busy refugee camps, there will not be enough space for household latrines, and also many people will be using the same latrine, many different families. Also, there's cases where the groundwater is very high, so that means that pits or septic tanks need to be fully sealed and therefore fill up quickly. Or in urban context, where there is a built environment and therefore no possibility to close pits and septic tanks and to dig new ones. In all those cases, fecal sludge management is required. Next slide, please. This is the last terminology slide. What we mean with fecal sludge management, it's a safe containment, emptying, treatment, and reuse of disposal of fecal sludge. And with, in order to be a safe sanitation service, the treatment needs to treat properly the liquids and the solids. And the treatment needs to treat up to standards that are suitable to the local conditions. So whether it's possible to reuse or where it's safest to bury, and the whole system needs to be designed for that. So this is fecal sludge management, the containment, the transport, the treatment, and the reuse or disposal of fecal sludge. Next slide, please. Yeah, so then moving into the motivation for issuing the standards. Next slide, please. So this slide was created by a master student, Ide Opdam, who worked with the technical working group. And what it shows is that the sphere standards are not set in stone. They developed over time and generally triggered by big things happening in the humanitarian world. They were adjusted. The last revision, the third revision of the Sphere Handbook was published in 2018, even though the work towards that handbook started way earlier. And the handbook addresses ex-situ management, but from the technical working group perspective, we felt that many of the lessons from the Rohingya crisis, which started in 2017, which was one of the first crises where fecal sludge management and really also the treatment was such a big part of the humanitarian WASH response, have not fully been included. Next slide, please. So while the current sphere recognizes that the provision of sanitation services require more than just latrines, there's no clear guidance of how to provide sanitation service change and when on-site solutions are considered safe or when you need fecal sludge management. Also, there is a reference to national treatment standards, while very often they are only available in many countries for the liquid component of the fecal sludge or wastewater, whereas in the solid fraction, a lot of pathogens and helminths exist. In addition, there's no mention of sanitation worker safety, which from the do no harm principle should be important according to us. And the local context might not always be as included in the guidance. And next slide, please. Yeah, so this is actually where I hand over to David.
Lovely, thank you so much. So that's a very clear account of how we got to the standards and why the standards were written. So I'm now going to take us through, I've called it a deep dive in standards, but it's probably more of a medium dive, that there's more detail, but I can't go through the whole detail in the time we've got, but I will explain the basics to you. Before I start though, I wanted to just say two things. First of all is, I'm talking to you also, you know, as somebody helping with the standards, but I'm also talking to you as a practicing engineer working in fecal sludge management. And the standards, what standards mean to me is something that I can be moving towards and encouraging me to do better in my work. And it's something I can be held account to and hold myself to account to. So this is really what the standards are, trying to make us all, help us all, you know, do a better job. So let's just go through the standards. Can we have the next slide, please? So as we've explained, you can look at our standards or these standards as a natural extension of the sphere standards. And this slide is showing us that we've got two standards really in that we've written up. The first one is sphere, and the second one takes us beyond sphere into what we can be doing. So can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so standard one. Now, standard one is not going to come as a shock to anybody on the call. It simply says the environment should be free from human excreta. That's something we've been doing, you know, for a long time. And we have an indicator for that. So we try to structure the standards a bit like in the same format as the sphere standards. So we have a standard, we have an indicator. So when you've achieved the indicator, the standard's been met. And then we have some key actions and some guidance. So the indicator for the first standard, we only have one indicator, and that is there are no human feces present in the environment in which people live, learn, and work. So that's not rocket science. We know that, and we've been trying to achieve that for a long time. But it does beg the immediate question: what happens to the fecal sludge when it's been removed from the environment? Where does it go? How do we handle it? Because it doesn't just disappear. It's simply not in a particular place. So this is where standard 2 comes in. So can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is the new challenge, standard 2, which says access is provided to safe sanitation systems. And as we've already explained, systems means infrastructure and it means services. The description we've given here is that the selection of safe sanitation systems should be context specific, respond to local physical and social institutional conditions. So importantly, this is not a one solution fits all, one size fits all solution. But the thing we are saying is constant all the time is the word safe. So we're looking at a safe sanitation system. And we are now in the standards, we're saying, well, how did we know something's safe? What are the indicators of a safe sanitation system? And we have basically, we've come up with 4 indicators of a safe system. And I'm going to take you through these 4 indicators, which are really the key, the heart of our sanitation standards. So indicator 2.1, the first of these 4 indicators is that people have access to sanitation facilities that are adequately located, respecting distances from surface or groundwater sources, and with user interfaces based on user-centered designs. Now, again, you could argue we've been doing that for a long time, and maybe that's not entirely new, but it does need to be restated because it's the first step in the sanitation chain. Now, can we go on to the next slide, please? So we've done the first criteria of what we consider a safe sanitation service would be. These new indicators, these next indicators are probably quite new to the sector as standards, although we've probably been trying for a while to achieve them, but we're laying them out quite clearly now. So indicator 2.2 is the health risk of sanitation workers, and that's all staff, including desludging workers, transportation and treatment, is minimized. So we are taking on the responsibility of the working conditions of the people who are asking to improve the sanitation services. It's not good enough just to think it's okay, because this is difficult work, and we have to take account and responsibility for the people working in the sanitation chain that we're setting up. That's in indication 2.2. Indicator 2.2. Indicator 2.3 is toilet pits and tanks are safely desludged and the fecal sludge is safely transported. So it's a very short indicator, but in those few words, it's actually a major step forward in the way we think about sanitation. We're no longer just walking away from toilets and septic tanks thinking our job's done. We're now taking responsibility, or at least thinking about what happens when those facilities are full or need emptying. In a sense, I use the word responsibility, but we are responsible, having built these facilities, to think about how they will be emptied and handled once they're full up. So that's indicator 2.3, which is basic emptying and transportation. So you can see we're moving along the sanitation chain now. The 4th and final indicator, come to the next slide, please. The 4th and final indicator, 2.4, is that fecal sludge is safely treated and disposed of. And when we say fecal sludge at this stage, we're talking about the liquid fraction and the solid fraction. At this stage in the standards, what we've done is we've set up some decision trees to help you in the field on how to dispose of these two fractions. So in the standards, there are two decision trees, one for the solid fraction and one for the liquid fraction. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So the first one is for the solid phase. And what we're saying here is, ideally, your first priority, or your first objective, if possible, your preferred objective, if possible, is to reuse it. If that's not possible, then to bury it. And if that's not possible, to burn it. Can we have, and then the next decision tree is for the liquid fraction. And we're saying with the liquid fraction, again, your preferred option, if possible, is to reuse. Thank you. Yeah, is to reuse. If you can't reuse it locally, then to use infiltration, put it into the ground through infiltration networks. And if you can't infiltrate it, then to put it into surface water. If it is to go into surface water, we have given an indication of the quality of the final effluent of the liquid before it goes into the river. That's in the bottom right-hand box. They're not binding standards, but they're indications of what we feel would be appropriate before they went into the river. But as we said before, everything's locally, everything's has local context. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So there's an awful lot in the standards themselves. There's an awful lot more guidance and help key actions and that will help you. So I've gone up quite a pace here, but it's important to understand that these standards, we have done our best. We have consulted, we have we've drafted, we've redrafted, and we've produced a document. But the industry is new. This sector is new. It's only a few years old, and we are all learning how to do the best job in this system. And these standards really reflect where we are at the moment. And we recognise that as the years progress, we will get much better. We will make mistakes. We will have successes. We will learn as a professional group. And it's very important that these standards are taken out now, taken off the shelf, and taken out and tested. And part of the reason for disseminating the standards today is we want to ask, and I want to ask, my colleagues and my friends out there, to take these standards and actually use them in the field, in the projects and the context that you find them, and provide feedback on how they're doing. Are they useful? Were they relevant? Did they actually enable you to do your job better? Are there errors in there? Is it inappropriate? Well, whatever these standards, whatever you find of these standards, we're asking you to take them out into your day job and provide us feedback, because we're going to revise these standards next year, end of next year, and update them based on our learning experience. I should say, I myself am using these standards at the moment with work I'm doing in Cox's Bazar with the British Red Cross, and I will be providing my own feedback on them soon. So this is very important. A call to road test these standards, please, and let us know what you think of them. So I think that's my bit finished. Can we have the next slide, please?
Yes, so thank you, David. As shared in the chat as well, the standards can be found at the Fecal Sludge Management Technical Working Group page of the Global Wash Cluster's website. Links in chat, but will also be shared with this presentation, and also at the Emergency Wash portal where the compendium is also online available. We can move, I think while we move into the Q&A, it's good to underline that after the session, we will send out a survey where you can indicate your willingness to be included in the formalized road testing of these standards, because we'd like to keep you all involved, of course, in the processes that David was just explaining. So that will come in a follow-up email to everyone that registered. And next slide, please. Yeah, so here I hand over to Tineke, who has been managing the Q&A. And yeah, please keep those questions coming. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marij and David. Thank you very much for the presentation. So we now indeed start with the Q&A portion of this webinar. So I've seen already a lot of questions in the webinar Q&A. I try to answer some of them, but I think it's also good to maybe discuss a few of those, because they're not, you know, they're not straight answers to this. It's more points of discussion, I guess. And like Marij mentioned, that any questions that we do not get by the end of the seminar, we will be included in a question and answer document, and that will be shared on the FSM Network website. So you can also upvote questions if you like, which you find very important questions by others. What I will do now is I start just with the first one by Jonathan. And the question is, are these standards limited to the emergency situations only, or they are general standards that can be applied in every situation? David, maybe you can say something about this?
Yes, with pleasure. Jonathan, thank you for the question. So the answer is they're called the standards for emergencies and are geared towards emergencies. But clearly, the ability to deliver decent fecal sludge management applies outside emergencies. And a lot of the topics and a lot of the key actions and the tips in this apply wherever we are trying to apply fecal sludge management. So yes, they do apply outside. Well, they are helpful outside, but we are trying to focus also on some of the particular difficulties that you face in emergencies. But the answer is fecal sludge management. We need to get better at it everywhere. And so yes, I think you can use these outside emergencies as well. So I keep them with you wherever you're doing your work, really.
Thanks, David. Marij, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, I totally agree with what David said, and that was also the participative process with experts and with fecal sludge management technical working group members was really humanitarian sector focused. However, one of the points that we, because of the time, could not dive into detail in is the phased approach, right? So we have a very first phase emergency approach in the standards, which says public health is the main focus in the first emergency phase. And next phase, you really include environmental protection and aiming for reuse. And I think that phased approach is very much humanitarian, whereas developmental fecal sludge management should always really focus on both.
Okay, thank you, Marij. Yeah, maybe to add also to that, when we were developing the standards, we also made an overview of available standards for fecal sludge management outside of the humanitarian sector. And there are some developments. Hey, you have the ISO standards, which are very stringent. We looked into those. You have some, some other standards by some other organizations. But basically, most of the standards are focusing on wastewater treatment, which is a different system and a different quality of material that you have have to treat. So there were a lot of discussions indeed on what constituents we should focus on, where should we look into, and what is important in the context of emergencies. So that led finally to these few values and standards that we set, but they're not cast in stone. And we also have to see, depending on the experience of others, whether those standards are maybe too rigid or too loose. Should we, include other ones? So that is where we definitely need your input and your help afterwards, I think. So how applicable, is this in the field? And maybe related to that, there is a question from Brian on why is reuse put first? It is hardly a priority in an emergency. Surely safety is the primary option. Marij, you already touched upon that. Maybe you can say something about that.
Yeah, well, this has been a great topic of discussion, and during the participatory process leading up to these standards, I read also in the chat that it might look now that this is the only first moment we are looking for field input, which is not the case. It has been consultative for the whole development year. Now we're just widening scope. But during this preparation, that was a big discussion, of course, on how reuse and the sanitation value chain, how that should be balanced with the focus on public health. And what we like the midway where we ended up with is in first emergency phase, definitely focus on public health, because that's in the first emergency and like the real first phase, it's top priority. And afterwards, reuse is put first because it connects with green response, with environmental protection, but only when very strict standards can be met, which means only on-site reuse and only meeting the WHO risk-based approach standards for reuse. So it is put first, but under very strict guidelines that require quite some resources and capacities. So therefore should be seriously considered. That's the approach we ended up with.
Tineke, can I just answer that question as well, which is a very good question. And I'm speaking here as a practicing engineer. When I look at that hierarchy, the decision tree, I want to be getting as near the top as I can, but the reality of the situation I find me in is pushing me downwards. And I'll give you an example. The British Red Cross is working in Cox's Bazar with a fecal sludge treatment plant, and we are at the moment having to incinerate the sludge into Montford incinerators. So we are working really hard with the camp authorities to try and stop incinerating and go into co-composting. So we're working our way up the ladder. It's hard work, but we're not happy. Our standards, this is where the standards are. We're having to incinerate because of the circumstances we find ourselves in, but we are not satisfied with that situation, and we're trying to meet the standard of getting ourselves upwards towards to recycling. So I think that's the difference between reality and the objective. The standard is to encourage us to do better.
Okay, thanks, Marij and David. Then there is a question also on behavioral change. How to deal with the behavioral change challenges. Marij, I see you are.
As these standards are supposed to be, or we are dreaming to have them included in Sphere, and behavior change is clearly not the main expertise of the fecal sludge management technical working group members. We did not go into detail on that, also because we hope to add them to the sanitation component of Sphere. However, there is a mention in the activities of that any sanitation activity always should go hand in hand with properly developed hygiene promotion campaign based on well understood needs and gaps of the population you're trying to serve. So there is a mention that it is essential to sanitation and hygiene promotion should always go hand in hand, like sanitation and water supply, and I think that counts for all WASH aspects, but we don't go into detail.
Okay, thanks, Marij. There are a few questions that are maybe can be easily answered also later on in writing, but there's maybe a nice question by Sophia, and she asked if have the standards been applied in some emergency case already, for instance, pilot application? Well, David, maybe you can say something about that.
No, so the standards they came out in July, and they've been publicly available since July. But we haven't yet had a case of someone picking them up and using them and applying them. This is what today is about. Today is in effect, our request to do exactly what you're asking. People within the working group have been using them, and obviously they were based on the experience up until the moment they were written. When they were written, we'd consulted. But an example of them going out have been used, not yet, but hopefully after today, people will go and try them for us. I've been using them, as I gave an example just now, where I'm using the standard to argue in the situation I find myself in, Cox's Bazar. I'm using the standard to demonstrate how we want to get up to reuse of sludge. So that's an example of where the standard is helping me make arguments and advocacy for finding funding to doing a better job. So there's an example, but not yet, no.
Well, can I add also?
Yes, Marij, yeah.
Yeah, so as you also said, David, there is no pilot done, Like there's no properly documented implementation. However, since they were produced, they have been applied by FSA, by Fecal Sludge Management Technical Working Group members like David, but also, and we will come back to that later after the Q&A, the technical working group is providing remote support to WASH clusters and sectors with specific sanitation challenges. And almost in all those contexts, we are using the standards to provide guidance on how to strategize and how to make plans for humanitarian sanitation activities. So they are used. We are receiving feedback, but at the same time, we are not documenting that in what we want to do now is like a formal rollout and a formal feedback collection and to really improve the standards based on that feedback.
Okay, thank you both. Then there is, I think, an interesting question by Paul on how do these standards fit back into the sphere standards, because that is something indeed that we discussed and are in discussion with. Are these meant to be guidance standards on their own, standalone? Marij.
Yeah, the answer is no. They are not developed to stand on their own. That's also why the first standard is based on what's already in sphere. Our objective, the objective of the technical working group, is to get them included in sphere because we don't want many separate standards. And if inclusion would not be possible for now, at least we would like guidance on when to use fecal sludge management and when not, and then to refer to the formal location of the standards. But the dream is definitely to include them in the sphere standards, to which they're very much linked.
Yeah, thank Marij. Yeah, so as we are in discussion indeed with the sphere, it is not known whether there will be a new version of the sphere handbook. The recent one is 2018. Yeah, so we were in discussing, but we definitely indeed would like to focus to be a part of the sphere standard. That is our aim. We just have to see how it goes, and we can't wait, you know, for it to be officially part of sphere, because then you know, it takes too much time. So that's basically it. There is also a question by Roy. He said, this is timely. We often have minimal post-commissioning and decommissioning strategies for sanitation facilities. Do the standards also apply in development context? Well, I think the answer is, we discussed that before, but we didn't say a lot about, I think, the commissioning and the decommissioning strategies. As such, they are not part, I think. Yeah, but it's something, yeah, that maybe we could explore later. I don't know, David, do you want to say something about it?
That's a very, just say thank you for raising the point of commissioning and decommissioning. No, that we haven't addressed that directly in standards at the moment, but this is good feedback already. You know, when we come to review. But I would just say, you know, I am personally at the moment involved in a commissioning of one fecal sludge plant and the decommissioning of the other. And the answer is it takes time and thought. I guess if this what the standards would say is make sure you allow enough time and resources to decommission and commission your assets in whatever program you're doing. But we haven't said that, but thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. And then there is a question on, well, anonymous attendee appreciating the linked elements regarding the Helmet X. But I do wonder how they fit in emergency context, requires a lot of testing, etc. That is true indeed. That is thing what we also discussed and considered. At IHG, we are working on a publication on how to do the analysis of Helminth X in a relatively simple, easy to handle approach, and we will make this public soon. And there are also some other people doing this kind of testing indeed to be sure that it can be done under the context of an emergency setting. Yeah. Then there is a question by Kit. I'm wondering how the standards incorporate menstrual hygiene, given that toilets are a place where women and girls change, wash, or dispose of menstrual products. Yeah, David?
So we haven't addressed that in detail in the standards, but these standards are not designed to work in isolation. So in terms of menstrual hygiene, design and stuff, there is plenty of material out there. And maybe one of the things we could do in the standards or when we publish them is make sure we're signposting people to the best practice in this area, and making sure it's, you know, we're encouraging people to follow the, you know, the best practice guidelines, because there's some wonderful material out there, and a lot of progress has been made very, you know, recently on in this area. So yeah, thank you for that comment.
Can I add? I think also that Suzanne and Nicole are telling us that we need to move from the Q&A
exactly.
to the next slide. But
I was thinking indeed, yeah, this is the last question. Yeah,
there is that was also another question, like how safety, female safety issues and menstrual hygiene issues are included. And what the guidelines, the guide that is included is to always, whenever we design or implement sanitation facilities, to be proactive in user consultation and to specifically reach out to women, children, elderly, and people with special needs, using a consultative tool like Sani-Tweaks, which is where that menstrual hygiene needs at least will come in. So that is included. Yeah, so Nicole.
Okay, well, thank you for answering the Q&A there. And audience, thank you so much for all your questions and discussion points. And we will definitely come back to that afterwards in writing. So Nicole, please.
Thanks so much. Thanks for all the great questions. Mariah, do you want to say a word about the FSM technical support?
Yes, I'll be quick there. So, of course, this webinar is on the standards, which is one output of the technical working group. But another work stream within the technical working group is available for remote support to WASH practitioners, mainly targeting WASH clusters and sectors, but also WASH practitioners that are working independently in humanitarian context. So if you're looking for practical guidance, for example, bill of quantities or standard operation procedures, or you could use guidance on how to strategize, you want to design and you need support with that, or you could use expert support in reviewing technical designs. We have that support available. We have quite some expertise in-house who allocated time. So reach out to us. My email is here. I will coordinate that with that support. Yeah, we are available. So please make use of this support. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. We're going to launch a poll now. We're interested to hear from you if you're interested in helping to road test the standards. So please just take a minute and introduce and answer the poll that should have popped up for you. Great, I can see that a large percentage of you are very interested in testing these standards. It looks like 80% of respondents are interested in road testing the standards. So that is great to see, and I'm sure the feedback will really be appreciated. So please watch for a follow-up email from us where you can actually share your email address and your name to sign up to road test the standards. You can also fill out the Google survey that was just dropped in the chat box to indicate your interest so that we have your information on hand. We'll also be sending out the presentations, the recordings, and the Q&A document in the next coming days. So before we close, I'd like to thank everyone for your interest and for spending the past hour with us. Thank you so much to our presenters, to the Global WASH Clusters Technical Working Group on Fecal Sludge Management, and thank you to our communications support at ProWash. I'm really excited. This is the first conversation that we're having with you around these standards, but looking forward to seeing the road testing and to keep working with you on this topic. So thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.